People in the town still whisper about the Wilkes family, always after midnight, always in a trembling voice, as if saying the name too loud might wake something ancient that has been sleeping beneath the floorboards of their memories. They whisper because they remember. They whisper because they're afraid. But mostly, they whisper because every time a Wilkes daughter placed a ring on her finger and walked into marriage, the sun never rose for her again. It begins like this. There is an old photograph in the hallway of the Wilkes estate, cracked with age and stained with something no one has ever dared to identify. In it stands a young woman, Lydia Wilkes, the first daughter known to have died on her wedding night. Her smile is soft, almost kind, but her eyes hold a fear that didn't belong to a bride. They say that if you stare long enough into her eyes, your chest will tighten and your breath will catch because you'll feel, just for a moment, what she must have felt that night. Something watching her from behind the lens, something she couldn't escape. For decades, people said Lydia died of childbirth complications, but those who lived close to the family knew the truth. Lydia had been perfectly healthy. She hadn't even conceived yet, and the marks found on her pillow, dark, finger-shaped impressions, were never explained. Her new husband, Thomas Walcott, claimed he had fallen asleep and heard nothing. No screams, no struggle, only silence. Silence so deep it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. After Lydia, the curse continued. Not once, not twice, but every single generation since 1874. Every Wilkes daughter who married, no matter her age, no matter her groom, died before dawn on her wedding night. By morning, the body was cold, the lips pale, the eyes wide open, always wide, as if they had died witnessing something too horrifying to close their eyes against. Doctors blamed heart failure, hysteria, sudden nocturnal death. Priests blamed demonic influence. Psychologists blamed generational trauma. But none of them had answers for the locked door mystery. Even when the daughters were married in the safety of their own home, with guards outside, with family members just a room away, with prayers carved into the wooden bedposts, with crosses hanging above their pillows, they still died. And each groom, every single one, lived. That was the part that made people stop talking. That was the part that turned whispers into silence. Because if the bride died behind a locked door, and the groom claimed he remembered nothing, then who, or what, killed her? No one knows when the town first started calling it a curse. Some say it began with the second daughter who fell victim. Others claim it was the third, because no one believes in curses until the pattern becomes too sharp to be accidental. But the Wilkes family had already started to accept their fate, long before the outside world gave it a name. Mothers would hold their daughters close as they grew older, pressing trembling lips to their foreheads. Fathers would forbid suitors, shouting that love could wait, that life was too precious. But the daughters, the Wilkes women, were known for one thing they loved fiercely. Too fiercely. Enough to risk everything for a chance at happiness. And every time one fell in love, the parents tried to stop the wedding. Sometimes they succeeded. Often they failed. And on the nights they failed, the same horror repeated itself. A scream. A crashing sound. A sudden, violent silence. The door locked from the inside. The groom found sitting on the edge of the bed in a trance. Or pacing. Or crying without remembering why. Or standing in a corner with his face to the wall. Always alive. Always confused. And the bride dead. Over the decades, the story grew like a living thing, twisting roots into the soil of the town. Children dared each other to run past the Wilkes mansion at night. Teenagers whispered the tale at midnight bonfires. Adults lowered their voices whenever the family's name came up, as though the curse might shift its gaze toward them. But the truth was that no one outside the family truly knew what happened on those wedding nights. The Wilkes estate stood at the far edge of town, surrounded by forest. Inside, the walls held secrets that had never seen daylight. And the house, with its towering black windows and heavy oak doors, seemed to stand as both guardian and witness. There were moments, rare fleeting moments, when the house felt almost alive, like the night Margaret Wilkes died in 1922. The neighbors claimed they saw the windows flicker with shadows, as if someone, or something, was moving inside the walls. When the servants ran outside screaming, They said the air around the house had vibrated, humming with a sound too deep to be human. And when the doctor arrived at dawn, he found Margaret lying dead on her wedding bed, her neck bent at an unnatural angle, her groom trembling beside her. He never married again. He never spoke again either. People said his mind broke that night. When Eliza Wilkes died in 1956, the police tried to intervene. The groom had insisted on being married far from the estate, in a hotel surrounded by people. But at midnight, all the lights went out. The hotel staff heard a shriek that made their blood freeze. When they forced their way inside the bridal suite, the groom was unconscious, the room smelled of iron and ashes, and Eliza lay motionless, her skin cold, her lips blue, her eyes staring at the ceiling with a terror no words could describe. After that, no man wanted to marry a Wilkes daughter, and no Wilkes daughter could marry anyone outside the family, without the whispers growing louder. The curse had become a living nightmare. It should have ended there, but fate had other plans. The family line continued, because the Wilkes women, despite their curse, were strong. And every generation was born with at least one daughter, always a daughter, never a son. Some said this was part of the curse, others said it was a punishment. A few believed it was a warning, that the curse was waiting for something, or someone. By the late 1990s, the family had become a ghost of its former self. Only 2 Wilkes women lived in the estate: Margaret Wilkes Sue, an aging widow with hollow eyes and trembling hands, and her granddaughter, Eleanor Wilkes. Eleanor was different. Where the older Wilkes daughters carried the weight of fear, Eleanor carried defiance. She walked through the old house with her head held high. She spent nights reading instead of hiding under her blankets. She asked questions no one dared to ask, and she refused to believe in fate shaped by death. But even she couldn't deny what happened to her older sister, Helena. Helena Wilkes, the most beautiful girl in the county, was 20 when she fell in love with a man named Everett Cole. Against all warnings, against all pleas, she married him. And on her wedding night, just like the women before her, she died. The scream that echoed across the estate that night haunts Eleanor still. She was 13 then, too young to understand everything, but old enough to know the house had awakened that night. She never forgot the way the ceiling groaned, the way the candles blew out, the way the walls seemed to pulse, as if a heartbeat throbbed within them. Helena was found with her fingers curled tightly around the bedsheet, as though she had died trying to pull herself away from something no one could see. Everett sat shaking on the floor, tears running down his face. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't even recognize that Helena was gone. Eleanor's grandmother locked every room after that, but the curse didn't end. It simply waited. As Eleanor grew older, 16, then 17, then 18, the whispers in town grew louder. People stared at her with pity, some with fear, a few with fascination, as if she were walking toward a destiny carved in stone. Mothers kept their sons away from her. Teachers spoke to her gently, as if she were a fragile flower about to be crushed. But Eleanor wasn't afraid. Not yet. She believed the curse was superstition, an old story fed by fear and coincidence. She believed the deaths were tragic but explainable. Medical mysteries, psychological breaks, accidents exaggerated by rumor. She believed the grooms were innocent. She believed everything except the truth, that the curse wasn't a superstition. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't a family secret. It was a predator, a breathing force that waited patiently in the dark, for a bride to slip into her wedding dress, for her heartbeat to quicken, for her vows to be spoken. It waited for the moment the door closed. It waited for silence. And once that silence fell, nothing, not prayer, not love, not family, could protect the bride. Eleanor would learn all of this soon. But not yet. Because before she confronted the curse, before she discovered the truth written in blood, stained journals hidden in the attic, before she faced the monster that had stolen the lives of every woman in her family, something else happened. Something that changed everything. Eleanor met Adrian Locke, charming, gentle, soft-spoken, a man who seemed to bring sunlight into the dark, decaying halls of the Wilkes estate. The town whispered again, not with fear, this time with dread, because they knew what Eleanor refused to believe: love, for a Wilkes daughter, was just another word for death. But this time, this generation, fate would bend. This time, the groom would not leave the wedding night alive. Eleanor Wilkes didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. She believed in drafts that felt like fingers, in old pipes that moaned like grieving women, in shadows that stretched too long down the hallway, because one of the old lamps was flickering again. She believed in the way the Wilkes estate creaked at night, like a tired giant shifting in its sleep. But she refused to believe the house was haunted. Not by spirits, not by curses, not by the restless souls of dead brides. At least, she told herself she didn't believe. But as she stood in the attic that winter afternoon, dust swirling around her like tiny ghosts made of sunlight, she felt something she couldn't explain. A pull, a heaviness, a sense that she was not alone in the room, even though she was. The attic had always been forbidden. Her grandmother kept it locked with an old iron key she wore around her neck, as though afraid the secrets inside might crawl down into the house if the door was ever left open. Eleanor had never questioned that rule until now. 2 days earlier, she had walked past her grandmother's bedroom and seen the old woman asleep, the key resting on her chest. Eleanor paused, torn between obedience and a curiosity that had been growing inside her for years. Then, as if guided by something outside herself, she stepped forward and took the key with trembling fingers. She told herself she would return it quickly, that she only wanted to look, that knowing what was hidden in the attic might finally put an end to the whispers that clung to the Wilkes family like frost on a window. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted answers her grandmother never gave. The attic door groaned when she opened it, the hinges protesting after years of disuse. Cold air swept out, carrying a smell like old paper and forgotten memories. Eleanor stepped inside, her breath fogging in the chill. The room was enormous, its ceiling slanted, wooden beams exposed like ribs. Boxes were stacked against the walls, some labeled with years long before she was born. An antique wedding dress hung from a rusted hook, a yellowed, brittle thing with lace sleeves that seemed ready to crumble into dust. Eleanor avoided it. Her heart thrummed in her chest, uneasy. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, only that she felt she needed to look. Something about the attic tugged at her, an intuition, a whisper without sound. She ran her fingers along the spines of old books, touched faded photographs whose faces stared back with hollow eyes. She opened drawers filled with letters so fragile they tore at the edges. Then she noticed the trunk. It sat in the farthest corner, half hidden beneath a moth-eaten quilt. Unlike the other boxes, this trunk was locked with an iron clasp, ornate and old. On its front was a symbol carved into the wood, a shape she had seen before but couldn't recall where. Something inside her chest tightened. She reached for the clasp. It opened. The trunk wasn't locked at all. Not anymore. Someone must have opened it recently. Her breath caught as she lifted the heavy lid. Inside were letters tied with a ribbon, a broken locket, a cracked mirror, and beneath them all, a journal. Its leather cover was darkened with age, warped at the edges, and stained with something brown that might have been ink, or blood. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The moment her fingers touched the cover, the air in the attic shifted. The floorboards seemed to tighten beneath her feet. The distant hum of the old house faded until she heard only her own heartbeat. She didn't know whose journal it was. Not yet. But the handwriting on the first page was large, looping. If anyone finds this, believe me, the ink looked smeared as if written in haste or fear. Eleanor flipped to the next page. We were wrong. It is not a curse. A drop of sweat rolled down Eleanor's spine. It is a man. Her breath stopped. A man. She read faster. Not a man like others. He wears the shape of one. But he is not flesh. Not spirit. Not mortal. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she turned each page. He comes for us on our wedding night. He comes because he is bound to the bloodline. Bound to take a bride. Bound to kill her before dawn so he may feed. A feed. The word made her stomach twist. The husbands are not victims. They are vessels. He chooses them. Marks them. Uses them. Eleanor froze. Marks them ever since childhood. She had seen strange symbols carved into the beams of the house. The same symbol etched into the trunk. the same symbol drawn in old photographs behind the brides. She had always assumed they were decorative carvings or family insignias. Now she wasn't so sure. She flipped the page, swallowing hard. We cannot escape. He takes the groom, lives inside him, breathes with him, sees through him, waits until the wedding night, then strikes. A chill ran through her blood. This wasn't superstition. This wasn't folklore. This was a confession. She read on, eyes stinging. If he does not have a groom to inhabit, he will not come. But men are always willing. Men are always eager. They think they marry love. They marry death. Eleanor stepped back. No. No, this had to be madness. A delusion. A story created by a terrified Wilkes woman who needed an explanation for tragedy. But then she turned the page again. No, not a face. A shape. A silhouette of something tall, human-like, but wrong. Its limbs too long, its fingers too sharp. Its mouth drawn open in a scream or a smile. Eleanor couldn't tell which. Around it were symbols. The same ones she had seen burned into the beams of the house, etched into mirrors, drawn in the dust when she was a child. Her stomach turned to ice. She flipped to the last written page, but instead of words, she found blood. A violent smear across the paper, as though someone had dragged their hand across it while dying. Eleanor stared at the page until her vision blurred. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. She didn't hear the creak of the attic floor. She didn't even realize she was no longer alone. Eleanor, she spun, heart leaping to her throat. It was her grandmother. The old woman's face was pale, chalky, almost, and her eyes were wide with a terror Eleanor had never seen in her. What are you doing up here? The old woman whispered, her voice trembling. Eleanor lifted the journal. I found this. Her grandmother stared at the journal as if it were a live snake. Put it back, she hissed. Put it back and forget it exists. I want answers, Eleanor demanded, stepping forward. Is this true? Is this real? You don't need to know, her grandmother snapped. You don't need to fill your head with these stories. Stories. Eleanor lifted the journal higher. Then tell me. Tell me the truth. Her grandmother's lips trembled. There is no truth, she whispered. But the fear in her eyes said otherwise. Eleanor pressed on. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted you to live. The words hit Eleanor like cold rain. Her grandmother's shoulders sagged. She suddenly seemed smaller, older, as if the weight of 100 years had collapsed onto her spine. The curse, the thing that haunts us, it is older than this family, older than this country, her grandmother whispered. And once it marks a bloodline, it never stops, it takes, and takes, and takes. Her eyes glistened. I lost my mother to it, my daughter, and Helena. Her voice broke. Eleanor felt her own throat tighten. So it's real, she whispered. All of it. Her grandmother swallowed. Yes. And the grooms. Her grandmother closed her eyes. He uses them, she whispered. Their bodies, their voices, their hands, their faces. They don't know what they become. They don't remember what they do. Eleanor felt her skin prickle. The groom is not the victim. The words from the journal echoed in her mind. Her grandmother reached for the journal, her fingers trembling. You must never open this again, the old woman said. You must never speak of it, never think of it, never let it guide you. It killed every woman who learned too much. Curiosity is what destroys us, not the demon. Eleanor pulled the journal back. No, she said softly. Curiosity won't kill me. Her grandmother's eyes grew wide. Eleanor, I want to break the curse. Her grandmother flinched as though struck. No one can break it, she whispered. We are born to die on our wedding night. It is our fate. It is our blood. Eleanor clenched her jaw. Not mine. Her grandmother stepped forward, grabbing her wrist. You think the others didn't try, she hissed. Helena tried. Eliza tried. Lydia tried. Every daughter tried. They all died for it. Eleanor's voice softened. I won't. Because you won't marry, her grandmother said, but her voice wavered. Eleanor hesitated. And in that hesitation, her grandmother saw the truth. You've met someone, the old woman whispered, horror blooming in her eyes. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was confession enough. Her grandmother squeezed her wrist so hard Eleanor almost cried out. "End it," she said fiercely. "Hate it now. Stop seeing him. Stop talking to him. Forget him. If you love him, let him go. If you love yourself, run." Eleanor swallowed hard, her heart twisting painfully in her chest. "It is," her grandmother insisted. "It must be, or he will die, or you will." But Eleanor couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when Adrian was the first person who made the house feel less haunted. Not when he was the first person who looked at her as though she wasn't cursed. Not when he was the first man who made her feel alive. Her grandmother's voice softened, turning fragile. "Eleanor, my child, please." Eleanor closed the journal, but she didn't put it away. Instead, she held it tightly against her chest. "I need answers," she whispered. "And this is the only place they exist." Her grandmother stepped back as if Eleanor were holding a weapon. "In seeking answers," she whispered, "you will find death." Eleanor looked at the journal. "No," she said softly. "I will find the truth." But neither of them knew that the truth had already begun watching her, already begun waiting for her, already begun choosing her. And deep inside the house, somewhere below the floorboards, somewhere behind the walls, somewhere in the dark, something stirred. Eleanor Wilkes had always believed she was a good judge of character. She studied people the way others studied books, quietly, patiently, noticing the subtle gestures that revealed who they really were. So when she met Adrian Locke, she thought she knew exactly what kind of man he was. Kind, gentle, attentive. But she was wrong. She simply didn't know it yet. She remembered the first time she saw him, standing on the gravel path outside the Wilkes estate, his coat dusted with snow, his breath forming small white clouds in the winter air. He had dropped a stack of books while trying to navigate the old, uneven stones. When Eleanor stepped outside to ask if he needed help, he looked up at her with warm, almost boyish eyes. And something in her chest softened. He was everything the Wilkes world wasn't. Bright, hopeful, simple. Not heavy and dread-filled like the estate. Not a shadow walking across old memories. He brought a different kind of peace, one she had never known growing up in a home where every mirror was covered and every photograph of a bride had eyes scratched out. Adrian was normal. Normal felt like a miracle. He visited the estate often after that, always bringing something. Flowers from the town market, books he thought she'd like, pastries wrapped in brown paper. He had the manners of an old-fashioned romantic and the heart of someone who genuinely wanted to understand her. Or so she believed. But then Eleanor began noticing things she couldn't explain. The first time, they were walking by the old Wilkes greenhouse. Its glass cracked, its vines long dead. Adrian brushed his hand along the iron frame, and she gasped. On his wrist, visible beneath the cuff of his sleeve, she saw a faint symbol. A shape she recognized. The same symbol from the attic trunk. The same one carved into the wood above the wedding beds of every Wilkes daughter. She told herself it was coincidence. A tattoo. A scar. A meaningless mark. But when she asked him about it, Adrian pulled his sleeve down quickly. Too quickly. And changed the subject. His smile faltered for a split second before returning. Perfect and bright. That was the first time she felt it. Something off. Something hidden behind his eyes. Something she didn't want to see. The second incident happened weeks later. Eleanor was in the garden at dusk, trimming the last of the winter roses. Adrian approached silently behind her, so silently she jumped when he spoke her name. She turned, breath-catching, her heart racing. His face looked different in the half-light. Sharper, taut, too pale. And when he smiled, it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry," he laughed. "Didn't mean to startle you." But his voice sounded wrong, an echo of itself, like someone speaking through him. Her stomach tightened. She asked him why he looked tired. He said he hadn't slept much. When she pressed further, he smiled again. Too wide this time. Just bad dreams. It wasn't the words that frightened her. It was the way he said them. As though the dreams weren't his. As though something else whispered through his mouth. Still, Eleanor ignored her instincts. She wanted so desperately to believe love could exist in her bloodline without death following behind it. But the third incident made denial impossible. Eleanor and Adrian were walking through the Wilkes library, a dim, towering room filled with dust and old books that carried the scent of time. Adrian wandered toward the back shelves, running his fingers over the spines. Then he stopped. His hand hovered over a particular book. A leather-bound volume Eleanor had never opened because it smelled like fire and sickness. She saw his eyes narrow slightly, his head tilting as though he heard a sound she couldn't. "Adrian," she whispered. He didn't respond. He reached out, almost entranced, and pulled the book from the shelf. As he opened it, a slip of parchment fell out, a drawing of the same grotesque figure she had seen in the attic journal, the demon with long limbs and a mouth that didn't look human. Adrian stared at it, not with confusion, not with fear, with recognition, and worse, a kind of familiarity. Eleanor's heart thundered. She snatched the parchment from his hand. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. "It belongs to my family," she whispered. He watched her for a long moment. His eyes darkened, not in color, but in weight. She felt as though he were seeing something inside her mind, peeling back her thoughts one by one. It was only when the floor creaked beneath her boot that the trance broke, and Adrian blinked as though waking from a dream. "What happened?" he asked, rubbing his temple. "My head, it feels strange." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Do you remember picking up this book?" "No," he whispered. "I don't even know why I'm standing here." His voice trembled with genuine confusion, or incredibly convincing deception. But Eleanor didn't know which. She told herself he was tired, overworked, perhaps coming down with an illness. Anything was easier to believe than the truth blooming like poison inside her chest. She wanted love, wanted normalcy, wanted something other than death. But the truth was growing too loud to ignore. And then came the night everything changed. It was late, past midnight, and Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to the attic journal, the drawings, the strange marks on Adrian's skin. She relived every moment of oddness, every too long stare, every too sharp smile. Her thoughts spiraled deeper until she made a decision she hadn't been brave enough to make before. She needed answers from Adrian himself. No more pretending, no more excuses. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside into the cold night, the wind biting her cheeks as she hurried down the path toward town. Adrian's cottage was only a 20-minute walk, and she moved quickly, driven by equal parts fear and determination. She reached his home, breathless, and knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The silence unnerved her. Adrian was a light sleeper. He always answered quickly. Had he gone out? Was he ill? Had something happened to him? She tried the door. It opened, unlocked. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped inside. The house was dark except for a faint glow coming from the living room. A candle burned low on the table. Beside it were papers, scattered, torn. Some burned at the edges, as though Adrian had tried to destroy them. She picked up one of the papers. Her blood ran cold. It was an old photograph of a Wilkes bride. Not Lydia or Eliza or Helena, but someone Eleanor didn't recognize. The woman's face was blurred, scratched violently by fingernails. And beneath the image was a symbol burned into the paper with blackened edges. The same symbol. The one on Adrian's skin. Her throat tightened. "Adrian," she whispered into the darkness. Silence. She stepped deeper into the house, her heart pounding so hard she felt it echoing in her ears. Then she heard it, a faint whisper. Not words, just a sound, a breath, a presence. She followed the whisper to Adrian's bedroom door. It was slightly open, dark inside. She pushed it gently. Moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating the outline of a man sitting on the edge of the bed. Adrian. His back was to her. His head bowed, his hands resting motionless in his lap. "Adrian?" she whispered again. He didn't move. Eleanor took a step forward. Then she saw it. Carved into his back, into his skin, were symbols, dozens of them. Some fresh and bleeding, others old and scarred. They formed a pattern she recognized instantly. The ritual binding. The same drawing from the journal. Her breath caught in her throat. "Adrian," she whispered, voice trembling. What happened to you?" His shoulders rose and fell slowly, as if he were breathing deeply. Too deeply. Then he turned. Not fast. Not slow. Just wrong. The motion wasn't natural fluid, but distorted like joints bending in ways they shouldn't. His face was pale. His eyes were wide. His pupils dilated until they swallowed almost all the color from his irises. "Eleanor," he said softly, but the voice wasn't his. It was deeper, older, layered with something that echoed. Eleanor stumbled backward, her heart slamming in her chest. "Adrian, do you think?" The voice whispered through him. "That he brought you here?" Her blood froze. "He doesn't even know." The voice continued, smiling through Adrian's lips. "He sleeps while I wake. He speaks while I listen. He loves you while I devour him." Eleanor shook her head, tears filling her eyes. No, this isn't real." "Oh, but it is," the voice crooned, rising from the bed with a smoothness that made her stomach twist. "And he was chosen long before you were born." He stepped closer. Eleanor stepped back. "He is my doorway," the voice said through Adrian's mouth. "My vessel, my groom." Her breath shattered. "And soon," the voice whispered, leaning in, "he will be your killer." Eleanor turned and ran. She didn't look back. She didn't scream. She didn't think. She just ran. Because the truth she had been searching for had finally found her. Adrian was not the victim. He was the monster's cage. The puppet, the weapon, and the thing inside him. The thing that had killed every Wilkes daughter had awakened, and it wanted her next. The night Eleanor had been raised to fear her entire life arrived with an eerie calm that felt almost insulting. The air was too still, the moon too bright, the silence too expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable tragedy the Wilkes women had always met. But Eleanor wasn't like the others. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't praying. She wasn't surrendering. She had spent countless nights studying her ancestors' journal, memorizing every frantic warning, every trembling confession, every blood-smeared line that spelled out what would happen on a Wilkes wedding night. And because of that, she knew the rules. She knew the pattern. She knew the danger that waited behind the closed doors of the estate's east wing. The same wing where every Wilkes bride had breathed her last. She also knew she wouldn't be leaving that wing until either the curse was broken, or she was. The celebration had ended hours earlier. Guests had danced, laughed, toasted her new marriage, completely unaware that tradition meant nothing tonight. The newlyweds had left the hall with smiles plastered on their faces. Hers carefully placed, his disturbingly natural. Adrian's hand rested on the small of her back as they walked, but she felt no warmth from him. Only a chill that traveled straight through her bones, as though his skin held winter inside it. He led her down a long hallway lit only by flickering wall sconces. Their shadows stretched grotesquely along the walls, distorting with each step. Adrian didn't speak. He hadn't spoken much since the wedding ceremony ended. Something in him had shifted, no resurfaced. A presence ancient and patient had settled behind his eyes, watching her with an emotion that looked like hunger. She tightened her grip on her satin gown, feeling the concealed weight at her thigh. The blade her great-grandmother had hidden in the attic was strapped beneath the layers of her dress. A simple silver dagger, dull at the edges but still sharp enough to cut through flesh. Her great-grandmother had never gotten the chance to use it. Eleanor planned to change that. Her voice trembled slightly when she finally spoke. "Adrian, why are we going to the East Wing?" He didn't turn. "It's tradition, my love." His tone was soft, sweet even, but stripped of humanity. The words sounded memorized, recited from a script he had performed many times before. She glanced at the portraits lining the hall. Dozens of Wilkes women stared back at her, some smiling politely, others with expressions that hinted at secrets buried beneath their calm facades. She recognized the lineage she came from, each woman's life ending the same way, beautiful in her wedding dress, lifeless before morning. Her heartbeat fluttered at the thought, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. When they reached the final door, Adrian paused. His hand lingered on the brass handle, tracing the intricate carvings of vines and flowers woven around it. The metal looked almost alive under the candlelight, like the vines were slowly curling toward his fingers. "This room," he said quietly, "is where every Wilkes woman meets her destiny, Eleanor swallowed hard. From the hallway, the door looked just like any other, but she knew better now. Behind it lay the end of her bloodline, unless she fought her fate. Adrian turned to her, and the smile he wore this time wasn't one she recognized. It stretched too far across his face, pulling his features into something unnatural. "Are you ready?" Her pulse hammered inside her throat, but she kept her expression soft. "Of course," she whispered. He opened the door. The room was exactly as described in her ancestor's journal. A grand canopy bed dominated the center, draped in sheer white curtains that fluttered slightly despite the absence of wind. Candles burned on every surface, hundreds of them, their flames trembling as though shivering in anticipation. The air smelled faintly of roses, but beneath that sweetness was the metallic scent of something darker. Adrian entered first, his footsteps soundless on the deep red carpet. Eleanor followed, closing the door behind her. The click of the lock sliding into place echoed through the room like a death sentence. The moment the door shut, the atmosphere shifted. The candles flickered violently, their flames elongating into unnaturally tall shapes that twisted before settling. The temperature dropped until Eleanor could see her breath. The roses in the vases wilted instantly, petals turning black at the edges. Adrian stood in the center of the room, his back to her. His shoulders rose and fell slowly, almost too slowly, like he was inhaling something she couldn't see. Then he tilted his head to the side, stretching the tendons in his neck until they cracked sharply. "You've been reading that journal," he said, voice thick with something ancient. Her stomach tightened. "What makes you say that?" He finally turned around, and the man she married wasn't the one staring at her anymore. The symbols etched into his skin, symbols she had seen in the journal's blood-stained pages, began to glow faintly. Thin lines of light traveled along his arms, over his collarbone, up his neck, stopping just beneath his jaw. His pupils expanded until his eyes were almost black. A low hum vibrated through the room, resonating with the symbols as though they were awakening. "You know the story, then," he continued, stepping toward her. "You know what must happen tonight." She took a step back. "I know what you are." He smiled again, that same too-wide smile. "Then you should also know resistance is pointless. Your blood is promised. Your lineage has been bound to me since your ancestor made her bargain." Eleanor's breath hitched. She remembered the journal entries, describing a desperate Wilkes woman centuries ago who had tried to save her husband from death. She had begged an ancient presence for help, not realizing her plea would doom every daughter born after her. "You call it a curse," Adrian rasped, circling her slowly. "But curses end. Contracts do not." Her hand twitched toward the hidden dagger, but she didn't move yet. She needed him closer. She needed him unaware. Adrian lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was ice. "You were meant to die tonight, as all your sisters have, as your mother did." His thumb traced her cheek almost tenderly, but she saw the hunger beneath it. She swallowed her fear. "And if I refuse?" His smile widened into something monstrous. "You cannot refuse." He grabbed her wrist with inhuman speed, pulling her toward him. His grip tightened until she felt the bones in her arm strain. The glowing symbols pulsed faster, and for the first time, she saw something move beneath his skin, shadows shifting like smoke. "Your blood will strengthen the bond," he whispered against her ear. "And when you die, the demon will rise again. I will rise again." She felt the dagger press against her leg as her dress shifted. She forced herself not to look at it. Adrian leaned closer, inhaling her scent like a predator savoring its prey. "You smell like every bride before you did. Fear, defiance, hope." He chuckled softly. "Hope is the sweetest." Before he could tighten his grip further, she exhaled slowly, bracing herself. She slammed her knee upward, hitting him hard in the ribs. He staggered back a step, surprised. Not injured, but startled enough to loosen his grip. Eleanor tore free. His expression darkened instantly. "You think you can fight me?" he hissed, voice layered with something inhuman. "You think you can escape what your blood owes?" The candles around the room erupted with sudden intensity, their flames shooting upward like pillars of fire. Shadows swirled around him, gathering, thickening, rising. And that's when Eleanor saw it, the true form emerging behind Adrian. A towering shape, horned and skeletal, its limbs too long, its eyes two burning coals staring directly at her. The demon the journal had spoken of, the thing she was meant to revive tonight. Her heart thudded painfully. She reached beneath her dress, fingers closing around the dagger's hilt. Adrian lunged. She didn't think. She struck. The silver blade pierced through his chest, sliding between his ribs. His eyes widened, not in pain, but in shock. The glowing symbols flared violently, then flickered like dying embers. A scream tore from his throat, but it wasn't his voice. It was the demon's, a sound that cracked the mirror on the wall and made the floor tremble. He stumbled backward, clutching the blade, black smoke pouring from the wound. The demon behind him let out a roar that shook the chandelier, its form distorting, collapsing, unraveling like threads of darkness pulled apart by invisible hands. Adrian fell to his knees. "You break the bond," he gasped, reaching toward her. His fingers dissolved into ash before they touched her dress. Eleanor took a step forward, voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. "Watch me." With one final shudder. His body collapsed, turning into a pile of black dust that scattered across the carpet. The demon's scream echoed throughout the house one last time, before evaporating into silence. Then the candles extinguished all at once. Darkness swallowed the room, but Eleanor was still standing, still breathing, still alive. The curse, no, the contract, had been broken. And she was the first Wilkes daughter in 100 years to walk out of the East Wing with her heartbeat still steady in her chest. The silence that followed Adrian's collapse was a living thing. Thick, suffocating, clinging to Eleanor's skin like cold fog. She stood perfectly still in the darkened room, listening to the rapid, uneven beats of her own heart. For a moment, she couldn't tell if the trembling in her hands came from fear, victory, or the shock of realizing she was alive, truly alive, after a night no Wilkes woman had ever survived. The room felt different now, lighter somehow, as if an ancient weight had been lifted from its walls. Yet there was still a faint hum, vibrating through the wooden floorboards beneath her feet, a final echo of the creature that had haunted her bloodline for generations. Eleanor slowly lowered her gaze to the pile of black ash where her husband, no, where the demon's vessel, had fallen. The silver blade lay among the remains, glinting faintly in the darkness. She knelt, her hands shaky as she retrieved it. The dagger felt warm, almost pulsing, as though absorbing the last remnants of the evil it had destroyed. She held the blade with both hands and closed her eyes. Images flashed through her mind. The glowing symbols carving themselves along Adrian's skin, the monstrous shadow unfurling behind him, the scream that had rattled every candle flame in the room. It was over. But her body didn't believe it yet. Her mind didn't either. Eleanor pushed herself to her feet. Every muscle in her legs screamed in protest, but she forced herself forward. She needed to get out of the room, out of the East Wing, out of the suffocating trap that had been waiting to claim her life. She reached for the door, hand trembling as her fingers brushed against the cold brass. When she turned the knob, the hinges groaned loudly, resisting as if the room didn't want to let her go. But she pulled harder until the door finally swung open. The hallway outside was dim, lit only by a few dying sconces. The air smelled clean compared to the scent of burning roses and ash inside the room. Eleanor stepped out and closed the door behind her, pressing her forehead briefly against its wooden surface. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with grief. For the first time since the wedding preparations began, she allowed herself to feel everything. Not just the terror of what she had witnessed, but also the devastation of what she had lost. Adrian had once been someone she cared for, even if the demon had lived within him all along. She had loved the version of him she thought was human. She had imagined a life with him, a future, children, laughter. But all of that had been a lie crafted by something ancient and cruel. She pushed away from the door, tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but refusing to fall. There would be time to cry later, if she ever allowed herself to. For now, she needed to ensure that the curse was truly gone. The hallway stretched endlessly before her. Every painting of the Wilkes women seemed to watch her as she walked. their painted eyes filled with disbelief, awe, and something like relief. She paused in front of one portrait, her grandmother's. The woman's soft smile had always carried a hint of sadness, as though she knew her fate long before it arrived. "I did it," Eleanor whispered, touching the edge of the frame. "You can rest now." A faint breeze swept through the hallway, caressing her cheek. There were no open windows, no doors ajar. The air was perfectly still. And yet that single whisper of wind felt like an answer, a silent acknowledgement from the women who had suffered before her. Eleanor continued walking, her wedding dress brushing softly against the carpet. The fabric was stained with ash, dirt, and streaks of blood. She didn't want to examine too closely. She reached the top of the staircase that led down to the grand foyer. The house was silent, heavy with the remnants of celebration. Empty glasses, wilting flowers, chairs left crooked from abandoned conversations. The guests had all gone home hours ago. No one had stayed. No one had known the horrors taking place under this roof. The house, for the first time in a century, felt like it was breathing normally again. Eleanor made her way down the stairs, one step at a time. Each soft thud of her shoes echoed through the empty space. When she reached the last step, she paused, looking around with a strange ache in her chest. This home had raised her. It had protected her, and it had betrayed her. Or perhaps it had merely been trapped, just like the women who lived here. She walked toward the front door, but before she reached it, she stopped. Something inside her shifted, a realization she had been avoiding since the moment Adrian had revealed the truth. What would happen now? She had broken the curse, ended the contract, destroyed the demon. But that victory came with consequences. She had killed her husband on their wedding night. Even if she told the truth, who would believe her? The glowing symbols, the shadowy creature, the centuries-old pact. None of it would make sense to anyone outside the Wilkes family. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I need to leave," she murmured to herself. "But I need to do it the right way." She turned back toward the staircase. The family library was upstairs, in the west wing. If there was any place that held answers, or instructions, it would be there. She retraced her steps, her exhaustion fading as adrenaline carried her forward. When she entered the library, the scent of old books enveloped her, comforting and familiar. She moved to the far corner where her great-grandmother's journal still lay open on the desk. The final page she had read before the wedding contained a half-finished sentence. "If the demon is ever killed, the bride must." Eleanor had never discovered the rest. The page had been torn out. She rifled through the drawers, searching for the missing piece. Papers rustled, dust rose in faint clouds. Finally, she found it, wedged behind the bottom drawer, curled and yellowed. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. "If the demon is ever killed, the bride must leave the house before dawn. Its presence will cling to the walls until the sun rises, searching for her. If she remains, it may rebuild what was broken. But once sunlight touches her skin, the bond will be severed forever." Eleanor exhaled shakily. Dawn was still an hour away. She needed to leave now, truly leave. The house was not yet safe. She placed the journal and the torn page back on the desk. Then she walked out, closing the library door behind her for the last time. Down the stairs again, through the grand foyer, toward the front door. But as she reached for the handle, a faint sound echoed behind her. A whisper, so soft she thought she imagined it at first. "Eleanor." She froze, every muscle locked. Slowly, she turned. The east wing door, the one leading to the cursed room, was open, wide open. It had been closed when she left it. Her breath caught. The shadows inside that hallway shifted unnaturally, like smoke moving against the wind. The hum she had heard earlier returned, louder this time, vibrating through the entire house. It wasn't over. Not yet. Eleanor clenched the dagger in her hand. Her grip was tight enough to hurt, but she didn't loosen it. She took one step back, then another. Every instinct screamed at her to run. The shadow at the end of the hallway stretched elongated, reaching toward her like a long, skeletal arm. She took a deep breath. "You had centuries to haunt us," she whispered. "You're not taking one more." Then she turned and ran. She flung the front door open. The cold night air hit her face like a slap. She sprinted across the porch, down the steps, and into the long gravel driveway. Her bare feet tore on the sharp stones, but she didn't stop. The wind howled around her, whipping her hair across her face. A distant rumble echoed behind her, the house shaking, the demon's final fury trembling through its foundations. Eleanor didn't look back. Not even when she felt the shadows creeping behind her, curling at the edges of her vision. Not even when she heard the faint wail of something ancient and dying. She ran until the first streak of light broke across the horizon. Dawn. She stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath, knees weak. The sunlight touched her skin, warm, gentle, alive. The shadows behind her evaporated instantly, sizzling like mist under a flame. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, relief crashing into her with the force of a wave. Tears spilled down her cheeks, unstoppable now. She pressed her palms into the dirt and let herself sob for the first time since the night began. For her ancestors, for the women who never made it to sunrise, for the life she had dreamed of and lost. When she finally lifted her head, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The Wilkes estate stood silent behind her, the windows dark, the curse broken. She wiped her tears and stood slowly, determination hardening in her chest. She had survived. She had fought back. She had ended a nightmare that lasted generations. Eleanor Wilkes walked away from the house and into the new morning, not as a victim, but as the first daughter in her family to choose her own fate.